Garden Report is powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a studio edition of the Garden Report. We are back after a couple weeks off covering Cavs series and Heat series and playoff March, 10 games long, that leads the Celtics to the East Finals against the Pacers, which I don't think anyone saw coming at the beginning of the postseason here. I'm so devastated.
You're devastated.
And Pacers win today. They jump out to a ridiculous 22 for 27 start in the first half, a historic 69% shooting efficiency in the game. That's the best ever in the playoffs. And that's the kind of offense that the Celtics are going to be seeing in this series. Knicks crumble. On top of it all, Jalen Brunson broke his hand. So in some ways, Noah, I'm relieved that we're actually seeing somewhat healthy, competent opponent on the other side that the Celtics aren't just going to roll through because there's nobody left. But, man, that New York series, I've been talking about it for like 3 months. The energy,
I know.
the matchup, it was a more healthy, even series on that front. And just the energy inside the arenas for these games would have been amazing. And this could still end up being good, but it's not going to be like that New York series could have been.
Yeah, well, this is one point for the league not being rigged, because I don't think anybody in the league would have wanted Indiana to be facing Boston in this round.
Well, it's tough to rig it when there's no one available.
Yeah, but I think you're right in the sense that New York was going to be a more exciting matchup, and New York has had such an exciting run this postseason, but they had nothing left. I mean, you don't want to face a team that's, I can't even imagine no Jalen Brunson for that whole series. Like, it would have really been a difficult Eastern Conference Finals to even conceptualize. Indiana's been healthy, they've been playing well, and I think people have a lot of critiques of various aspects of Indiana's game, which are legitimate, but at the end of the day, they're here. They made it to the conference finals, and I thought being down 3-2 and coming back and winning 2 straight against New York, Game 7 on the road in Madison Square Garden, it's really impressive. So they're more resilient and they're more ready for the moment than I had expected when this postseason run began.
Yeah, and you can be here and not be here in a way, because we've seen conference finalists fall well short of who wins the conference final series, and that's possible here.
There's shades of Atlanta Hawks, like Trae Young's Hawks.
Even the 17 Celtics who went there and got blown away. So that could happen. That tends to happen when there's a surprise team here in the conference finals, and the Pacers certainly have a big deficiency on defense that's going to hurt them immensely here. Tatum averaged 32 against them during the season. Brown had a ton of success too. Celtics can score at will against this team, at least from the perimeter. Now, it's going to be interesting. Kristaps Porzingis out at the start of this series, a huge factor here, I think, and an opportunity for the Pacers, who are going to be that more rest versus rust kind of situation. They're going to be coming off games and playing in rhythm, is the word I was looking for there. So they'll have that going into this series. Of course, the Celtics have been off for about a week now. So I'm kind of feeling like 5-6 game series here, but it could go longer if Kristaps Porzingis is out. What are your first impressions of just how competitive this series could be?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think they need Porzingis for the series. They shouldn't need him. That's kind of the case, I think, about any matchup until the finals here, that this roster is structured to withstand him not being around, and there's no reason that they should not be able to beat Indiana handily. That being said, to win 3 consecutive series in 5 games is really hard to do. It shows a really strong focus and consistency that past Celtics teams definitely wouldn't have had. But they did it twice, and there's no real reason to think they can't do it again. So I have Celtics in 5 in this next round. I will say, though, Indiana's one of just a handful of teams that beat the Celtics twice during the regular season. I think Denver was the other. That might be the 2. There might be one I'm missing. But they did do it, right? The in-season tournament, there was another close loss, in Indiana that they beat, on that crazy call and with Jalen Brown getting hit on the head. So I do think they have the confidence to go against Boston, knowing that they had a couple of wins this season. It was a very competitive season series. We talked about it. It would be a difficult matchup just because they are such a competitive team. And they had a stretch there post, Halliburton's injury where they didn't look as impressive as they did for stretches of the season, but he's looking a lot better, and I think them as a team are starting to mesh, not to mention the fact you have Siakam now on that roster. And so I think that there's a lot of things about this team that actually make them a lot more difficult than maybe people are thinking right now, as they're just expecting this to be like a 6 seed that maybe kind of beat a bunch of injured teams en route to the conference finals.
Yeah, 3 things certainly there. They have the best offense in the league, and offense in this postseason that's been 4 or 5 points per 100 better than the Celtics. Celtics are in second at around like 117. Pacers are up at like 122 per 100. So they're scoring at will. They hit a ridiculous pace. Celtics actually, I looked today, last in pace in the playoffs. I think some of that's the series they've been in rather than their slowness.
Last of the 4 remaining teams?
Last of 16
wow.
through the playoffs in pace. So some of that's the Heat and Cavs playing in those series.
Yeah.
Some of it's them. They have stagnated a little bit offensively at different points, and that's the side of the ball we certainly have more concerns with right now in this postseason. So that's number one. Number two, you're looking at a Pacers team that prevents the three very well, and their opponents shot the fewest number of threes per game during the year. That's going to force the Celtics to get back inside a little bit, which they did well against Cleveland. But does that kind of break their rhythm? Does that end up hurting the math a little bit, like the Cavs were able to do at different points, despite them not being healthy? And then number three, I look at the Pacers' ability to take the paint the other way, and some of that's in the half court. Siakam devastating in this last series, scoring inside against the Knicks, but also the full court. I think one of the biggest defensive concerns you have about Boston is transition defense, and you're certainly going to have to do that against Indiana there. So, like we talked about with New York, you had some concerns there, but especially in the health situation they were in, you didn't really worry about them competing and certainly not beating you. Indiana, you can actually name like 3-4 things that concern you a little bit going into this series. I guess the key is how Halliburton's going to play, because he's been extremely inconsistent.
Yeah, he's been really up and down. You're right. Like, I feel like some nights you watch a guy who looks like he's one of the best players in the league at his best, and then other nights he just looks like an average point guard, or even, he's been outplayed by McConnell at points, right? So, yeah, that's a big question mark around where he's going to be. I know he was listed as questionable with like 3 different injuries throughout the series, and so he's battling a lot on his own. I don't know exactly how he's feeling right at this very moment. I'm sure he's feeling, excited to be, have this opportunity, but that will be a big determinant of how he's able to play, because he really willed Indiana to win in the in-season tournament when they beat the Celtics. That was all him. I mean, in the fourth quarter, some of what he was doing was spectacular. He looked like he was the next rising star, and then he really fell off that second half of the season, and I think we don't really know what his identity is right now.
Definitely more of a pass guy than score guy too, at least right now. The Celtics can play that well. They can stay attached to some of the other guys and try to make him beat them, as I think they did a little bit with Mitchell, certainly with Bam in that first round. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. Going into this third round of the playoffs, I'm interested to see what those stat projections are for round 3 for the first game there on Tuesday, and that's my favorite part about using Prize Picks. You can go in there, see what the player projections are. Of course, to play, you pick 2 guys. Could be different sports, but let's just keep it to this series for now. Maybe you're feeling Halliburton's points. Maybe you're feeling Tatum's assists. He's been putting up some big numbers there this season. All you need is 2, but you can pick as many as 6 players and win multiple times your money over there by just picking more or less on those stat projections. It's that easy at Prize Picks, so go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use our code CLNS for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Of course, hockey going on right now as well. Unfortunately, the Bruins not in it anymore, but still some big games over on that side. Baseball and a couple more rounds of these playoffs. Some big games going on today, and then the conference finals. So go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use our code CLNS over there. We hit on Halliburton. We hit on some of the keys to the series so far, but I do want to get into a big one on that Boston side, and it's Porzingis. I know you said you don't feel like they need him to win in this series, but it's going to be much tougher to do so, I think, into round 3 without him. You saw Horford start to slow down, at least prior to the Game 5, which was still kind of amazing what he did there in that spot. Every other day, I said that was a factor going into round 2, and it played out. He doesn't play as well going every other day rather than having some extended rest, and this is going to be an every other day series. And I don't think this is as much of a Luke Cornett series either. You have a Pacers team that's shooting 50% from the mid-range. They'll take those shots at about the league average amount, and the 3 is there too, which is a concern sometimes, especially Miles Turner's a spacing guy. So you worry about that a little bit here too with Cornett. We haven't seen Tillman. I don't know what's going on there. I think that's a Missoula question for tomorrow probably. And I think you're not going to see Keita during this run as much as I love him. So you need Porzingis back, at least by the later stages of this series, I think. Or you're going to risk this going 6 games or maybe even a 7th game if the Pacers play at a certain level here, if Porzingis doesn't play at all in this series.
I mean, I think there's 2 things here. Do you need him back, or is your are you going to be a much more dominant team if he's there, right? Just looking around the league with the injuries that teams are overcoming, to me, like this Celtics team, they have the pieces without him. Yes, there's a big load on Al Horford, but you also have guys like Jason Tatum that can guard multiple positions, and he can play that role of the big man if need be for stretches of this game. And I think that's part of what makes the Celtics team so unique. When I'm thinking about Porzingis coming back, and I don't want to jinx it or get ahead of ourselves here, but I just don't like the idea of him coming back for the first time for game 1 of the finals. Like that doesn't seem like a recipe of success, regardless
especially if it's Jokic on the other side.
It does, whether you're facing Jokic, whether you're facing Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns and a Minnesota team that just beat the Denver Nuggets, and the Mavericks, whatever it is, I think that's to me is the biggest advantage of him coming back of the series, is that he's now not coming back for the first time in the finals. So it's going to take him some time to get his rhythm back. It's going to take him some time to be 100%. He's probably not going to be 100% this postseason. So that's a big element of it. As we're talking about his timeline, I keep thinking to myself, you get him back for game 3, that gives him a ramp up period, more so than you need him for game 3 or else you're at risk of losing the series. I think if they lose the series, it wasn't about Porzingis. There were other things that were at play here. And what I like about this matchup is that, like you said, I think it's a good matchup for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, which is a good ramp up for the finals. I feel like I keep bringing this theme back of how do you want to prepare for the next series, but it is going to be a little bit of a shock when you have Miami, Cleveland, and Indiana, and now you're facing the defending champions, right? So there's just different elements of how do you prepare for that, and how do you how does the team kind of primed to be ready for that type of matchup and that type of intensity?
It's a good point that other guys can fill in that center role by doing different things. Tatum's certainly been the rebounder. You have different guys inside they can guard there. Holiday certainly could go up against a Turner if you want to switch matchups there. So they have the ability to do all of that. I just think when you're in a series where it's maybe not a Cornet series and he can't play as many minutes for you, and you don't trust Tillman, maybe that's why we haven't seen him, and you're putting 38, 39, 40 minutes on Horford and getting diminished returns from him at that point, that's where you start to miss his ability to even just eat minutes in this series here. And so maybe you wrap it up in 5 again, and that's not a problem. You can certainly do that, especially with the defensive deficiencies the Pacers have. But if this series goes longer and he can't come back, that's where I think you get into a little trouble, because then at that point Horford's fatigued. You're maybe not able to beat the Pacers from that position, and they take advantage of that defensively by not having to guard him as much. And then on the defensive end, they can start to attack him a little bit. And I know the Celtics liked that last series because it took the threes away from Cleveland.
Yeah.
Probably going to be a pretty similar dynamic in this series. I'd rather have Halliburton going at Horford inside than shooting threes over him. So that could be a similar result here in round 3 versus round 2. But my worry is that we might not see Porzingis at all in this series. Obviously, we saw him on the bike today. Not a ton on the court. Mazzulla is not answering questions, which I don't think is a red flag necessarily.
I think he just doesn't see the upside of giving us any information about his health.
I do think he would say if he was doing stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, but if he was doing stuff on the floor,
the Woj report said on-court activities.
Okay.
And then Mazzulla hasn't mentioned that at all. He acts like he doesn't see him when he walks by. That's been his thing from the beginning.
So that's obviously him playing games.
Yeah.
He must be doing something now, and we saw him in Cleveland bump in with his trainer a little bit more and just moving a little better. So we're obviously getting there. Of course, he's eliminated from 1 and 2. 3 is Saturday, so that's before the 4-point mark, and 4 is actually exactly on the 4-point mark. Yeah, 4-week mark at that point. So that's what I'm interested to see. Where's he at then? Because 4 weeks seems like a reasonable return time for him, given the injury and some of the average time missed here. But Giannis at that point, who obviously had the same injury, and we keep comparing him to...
And it sounds like Giannis's was more severe. I mean, It's not the most... we don't know for sure, but just based on seeing Porzingis a weekend and how Giannis then described he was unable to walk, really, it sounds like Giannis's was probably more severe.
For sure, yeah, especially since he wasn't even really close after 4 weeks. So
there was never footage of Giannis doing defensive drills against assistants, I don't think.
Yeah, he was starting to get on the court and do some shooting and some similar stuff at the 4-week mark, but he said he was like 30-40%. At that point. So if that's where Porzingis is a week from now, just on the floor shooting, not really participating, that's where you're like, ooh, he's probably going to miss this whole series. And then, like you said, you try to bring him back for the finals at that point.
That's tough. Yeah.
If you don't see him in this series, you want it to be because you wrapped it up early. If you don't see him because it goes long and he just can't get back out there for 4, 5, 6, or 7 if it gets there, that's where you're like, ooh, this is lingering a little bit more than you want it to be. And that's where I think, to your point about the finals, they shouldn't lose this series because they didn't have Porzingis. But if Porzingis isn't Porzingis in the finals, you could lose the finals because you didn't have the real Porzingis.
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing that I've been thinking about. And there's obviously a track record of players missing substantial playoff time or missing playoff time, like Steph Curry even coming back and coming off the bench. But I don't know. I can't think of an example of someone, a pivotal player like that, missing the entire playoff run effectively and then coming back for the finals. I'm sure there is one, but it's an unusual circumstance.
Hayward tried in the bubble off the ankle injury, like the end of the East Finals. And it wasn't pretty.
Didn't work out, right.
So that's the thing, right? How does he look when he gets back? That's the other thing you have to consider.
And the other thing with him is that he's a long-term investment for this team. And so they're not going to put him in a situation where he's, at really high risk of re-injury or worse injury, like an Achilles, rupture or something like that. So they're going to remain conservative with him. I think, not the same conservative level that they were during the regular season, obviously, but I don't think they're going to put him out there if he has a chance to get hurt because he didn't make the full recovery and he's not at 100%. It's a little bit of a predicament just thinking long term. I think this is where we knew it was going to be. We knew that this was the series that we were going to start to hear rumblings around, like, when is he coming back? It was pretty much a certainty last round that he was going to be out, I think. So we're at that point now where, we're waiting for any sign of updates. And to be honest with you, I think, like, he's giving us a lot to look at, like, at practices and shoot-arounds. Like, that's kind of where we're getting our information from right now.
Not a lot.
But more than we're hearing. I mean, we never got told he's doing some on-court work with assistants, doing defensive drills. He's doing normal shooting now. We saw that, right?
And it is something that they're showing us that, because if it wasn't looking good, we're probably not seeing him.
Yeah, right. So, I think he remains the biggest question mark around this team right now, though, is just like where he's going to be at. And again, it puts Al Horford in a position where he can't miss any time either. And I get Al is like so resilient. We were just talking about injuries and luck and things like that. And Al's been so available, and knock on wood, I don't want to jinx him, but, he can't afford to, he's so needed right now.
Let me pull something from the chat here, because I haven't made a big deal out of it. They've wanted to hear about it. Where's Tillman?
Everyone's always asking.
Everyone wants to know where Tillman is.
I have no idea. It's so bizarre. I mean, this is what we thought he was here for, right? If Porzingis was going to go down in the playoff run, which was always a possibility, that he was insurance for him, and we just saw a whole round where we didn't see him at all.
They don't trust him. Or they don't like his fit. It's one of those two things.
I'm curious. I mean, we'll know if they don't even try to, like, re-sign him or anything, then we'll know that they didn't see a place for him on this team, and that this trade was not what they expected it to be or hoped.
Well, what happened with Muscala a year ago?
Yeah.
Similar situation. So it's sort of the opposite.
It is kind of similar, yeah.
Because he's the defensive player who maybe doesn't fit in offensively, and for Muscala it was the opposite of that. So we'll see if we see him in this series. I think they could use a little bit of him here if it's not a core net series especially. So we are also brought to you by Game Time. Check out the Game Time app. Game 1 Tuesday. If you want to get in the building, it's the app to go to. And you'll get $20 off your first purchase over there when you use our code CLNS. Of course, terms apply. Game Time, you get your best deals right up until game time and even a little bit after. So that's what you're looking for there. Check it out. See if anyone's throwing up some last-minute tickets that they're just trying to get rid of up there. And you could score a deal over there, and you often do over at Game Time. It's probably the toughest time of year just about to get tickets at this point, but it's not New York, Boston. We're not going to see $600 tickets in this series, I don't think. So go over there, get a ticket. If you're going to Indiana, it's the app to use as well to get a ticket over there. I think those have been a little cheaper than certainly in Boston for the series that they've played so far. So a lot of options, hockey, baseball, concerts, events. They have it all over there at Game Time. So get $20 off your first purchase when you use our code CLNS. Again, terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last one I got here, because it is an interesting conversation going into this series. Have the Celtics been tested? Do they need a test? Is Indiana a test, you feel like, at least on the level of preparing you for a Denver, a Minnesota, even Dallas I'll throw in there. They're playing at a high level right now. So you have 3 high-level teams that could potentially play in the finals, and as this comes out, you'll be down to 2. But is this Indiana team enough of a test going into the finals to prepare the Celtics for that?
Well, I mean, the short answer is they're the test in front of them, so that's they can't control what obstacles they're going to be thrown their way, but they're a healthy team. I mean, they're missing Mathurin, and he has a big piece of their team. I feel like people are a little bit underrated that injury, but they are a healthy team, and they have a lot of talent, and they pose a lot of challenges, and they have the league's best offense, really, and historic offense. And so if they're playing their best, which they haven't at all points this postseason, and that's what makes this tricky, but if they are playing their best, the Indiana that we saw at various points against the Bucks, we saw today against New York, then yeah, absolutely. I think that they were at points this year where they were one of the best teams, especially in the Eastern Conference, and then they slipped a little bit and they became the 60. They were almost a play-in team, but they weren't supposed to be there. And so I think they definitely can, and I hope Indiana plays well, and I hope this is a really competitive series. But the other piece about this is that this group, various people on this team have they've faced so much adversity in the playoffs before. So I think sometimes people talk about this Celtics team as like, this particular run is where they're going to be building up all their, passing tests and building up adversity and overcoming challenges. But I mean, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have already played like every single team in the league, it feels like, in the playoffs. Drew Holiday's been there, Al Horford's been there. So I think the core of this team, like they don't need this playoff run, these first 3 series, to be the thing that gets them prepared for the final necessarily. I still like the idea of having a competitive series, and I like the idea of like giving everybody else a chance. But I feel confident that like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and those guys are ready for the finals. They don't need this round to determine that.
It'd be better if they could have seen a better test at this point. But like you said, you can only play who's in front of you. So there's no knock on them for not having those tests. And I do think, in spite of playing some teams that have been undermanned or had deficiencies that don't allow them to compete, they're handling it the best way by focusing on themselves and ways they can play better. Now, they have to come out and kill it offensively in this series. I think that's what you look at here and say,
absolutely.
If you don't do that against this defense, like, this is an opportunity for you to really get yourself going. And it's Tatum in particular, right? Because, again, 32, 11, and 5 or whatever he did against them during the year. He can't come out shooting 40% against this team again, especially because I think they're actually going to need him to be more of a scorer than a passer, facilitator, guy who defers in the series. Because, again, the Pacers are taking those threes away. So the paint's there. You're getting one-on-one coverage. You got to take advantage of it. And if he doesn't, that's what could allow this series to go a little bit longer.
Well, he's been struggling from 3, so maybe taking it away is a good thing for him.
Yeah, go inside.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, he hasn't actually been that inefficient when you take away the 3. That's what's killing his shooting percentages. Like, he's been okay inside.
Right. And he's not going there enough. I was looking, Synergy put these numbers out. He's among the top 15 players in drives, total drives these playoffs. He has the fewest points off those drives, even though he's got like 1.02 points per possession on those. So he's like 7th in efficiency, but he's just not driving enough. So he just has to do it more. He's at like a Luka level in terms of points per possession on his drives. So he's just going to do it more. And his drives per game went down this year. They're not at a high level in terms of how often he does it. And this is a perfect series for him to do it more, especially against, they have small perimeter defenders. None of them really scare you. Even a Nesmith, who's probably going to guard him a lot. Siakam in the series will probably try to throw some length at him. You can get to the paint against those guys, especially with the strength he's built up.
How much of a deterrent do you think Miles Turner is for him? Because I do think Tatum gets more deterred by rim protectors than Jaylen Brown does at points.
Well, that's why I bring it back to Horford. Can Horford space him out? And he's going to have to here.
Yeah.
It's, I think we classify this defense as a bad defense, and it's fair. They're just a weird defense, and they make mistakes, and I think they play a little
Halliburton is a huge liability.
He's a liability.
And I was thinking about what Drew Holiday was saying about Donovan Mitchell and wanting to be more aggressive offensively to tire him out.
Yeah.
To me, I'm assuming Halliburton will be on Drew again. I'm assuming that'll be his matchup, if not Derek White.
But try to hide him on Drew.
To me, it's like Drew Holiday, I'm sure, is going to come out aggressive again and try to target him defensively and tire him out, and also exploit the fact that I don't think Tyrese Haliburton can guard Drew Holiday, so I think there's a mismatch there as well that it will probably play to the Celtics' advantage.
Yeah, and again, they're going to do some weird things, so they got to be ready. Like, throw 2 at Tatum, he'll pass it, they'll rotate and leave the rim open, and Tatum just might have to be ready to cut at that point, or Horford off the catch. I don't think the Pacers are just going to ignore Horford the way like the Cavs did. They're going to maybe even send some like help over out on him in rotation. Again, the paint's open at that point. They're going to give up 2s, so you got to take them if you're the Celtics there, and that's going to be the challenge here. Shifting their mentality. It's a different opponent, much different style in this series. They got to keep the pace down. There's a lot of things here that, again, maybe not the best opponent in terms of skill or talent here, but their ability to handle some of the challenges they throw at the Celtics here, I think, is going to say a lot about just their adaptability, which has been their strength. They've adapted well to opponents' situations. Obviously, this Porzingis injury now that they've persevered well through. So that's all stuff to watch here in this series, and it's going to be fun. It starts Tuesday at 8. It's not the Knicks. It's not New York, but we'll take it.
It's a healthy team, though. It's a healthy basketball team.
It's a real challenge. It's a real series. And Neesmith's in it, which I love, too. I love watching Neesmith. Our last sponsor here, but not least certainly, is PXG. We're getting 80-degree weather this week, Noah, so all the golf gear, great for the course that they have. You want to go get it. Even if you're just hanging out, it's great for, the hot weather. Great polos, tees, hats, certainly keep the sun off your face. It's all available over at PXG, and if you go to pxg.com/GardenReport, they're going to give you a discount on your first order over there. Again, that's pxg.com/GardenReport. Love their gear, a lot of different styles over there, so go check that out. This has been a studio edition of the Garden Report. We do this every week. Noah Dalzell does great work over at Celtics blog and is often here on the Garden Report. You'll continue to see her throughout the playoffs. So go check out all her work over on Celtics blog and Twitter, and check out ours over on CLNS Media. Series preview out now. We talked to Chris Gasper about it as well yesterday right after the game, so you can check out his perspective on this. And we talked about the Pacers with Scott Agnes a couple days ago, so an Indy perspective as well over on Celtics All Access. We're just churning out content now. It's that time of year. I'm Bobby Manning. Again, there's been a studio edition of the Garden Report. We'll talk to you soon. Hey, Bobby Manning here. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed this video, so subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out our social media platforms at Celtics CLNS.